And good morning. Good morning. This is Monday Morning Microsoft live from SAMexpert, your trusted software asset management and Microsoft licensing consultant. And let's use a few minutes to warm this up, because people are joining, people are joining our chat, joining the live stream. We'll give you some time to warm up. We'll give you some time to say hello. Hi, Johnny. Basically, there's a chat application. If you type anything in the chat on either Facebook or YouTube or Twitch, I'm going to see that. Today's Monday Morning Microsoft is the last one before the training event, which is gonna happen pretty soon. So let me flip quickly through. This is my introduction. You all know who I am. If you don't, you can find everything in the description. So we don't need to spend too much time on this slide. And thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder about the training. Let's go back to this one. It's on the 4th of August. So only a few days left, just a bit more than a week. It's very exciting. I'm not very used to saying I'm excited, but I'm very excited. I'm waiting for this training eagerly, and there's a lot of preparation going on. The first session on the 4th of August will be Microsoft Basics, an introduction to Microsoft licensing principles. We're going to be talking about principles. So I think that's the most powerful differentiator of the training that we're going to have from August to November. Is that we're not going to be just teaching something that you need to memorize. We aim to obviously give you the basics, but then to give you hints from the practical, from our practical life. Give you hints how to navigate the world of Microsoft licensing, where you would then be able to look, which websites to visit, which things to read, which files to save, to be able to refer to that information with that basic knowledge that we want to give you during that license management training. We don't want to overcomplicate it. There are lots of licensing, detailed licensing training materials. So we're not doing that. We're going to teach you how to think Microsoft. We're going to teach you how to manage Microsoft, how to manage the complexity, and it's still a growing complexity. Microsoft licensing complexity is not going down, it's going up. Every year there's something new. Look at power-ups, for example. That's a good example, but we're not talking about power-ups today. So this is the first time since we started this live when we didn't do any voting because of the preparation for the live. That's my fault. I just forgot to. But what we decided to do this week is that was my decision to take a few questions that we can group into Visual Studio free usage questions and just, explain them today, answer to those questions. What are those questions? I mean, where do I get them from is what you ask. So whatever questions you have on Microsoft licensing, whether you send it on LinkedIn to my direct messages, or whether you ask it in an event chat, anywhere, the best questions I collect in a list of community questions, and then we answer them in these live sessions, which will probably become Wednesday live sessions moved from Monday. I'm not really sure about the future of these particular lives that we have on Mondays. I just did a poll on the channel on the community tab, and the majority of people responded, although not overwhelming majority. So there's a bit of like a shift to that direction. The majority of people responded that they would rather prefer us to have weekly Wednesday shows. So then that 2:00 London time every Wednesday, there's either a business session or a training session or we answer your community questions, but it's always the same day, same time, so you kind of get used to that cadence, instead of having sessions on Wednesdays and these lives on Mondays. So that's where probably we're going. That's not yet the final decision, But then again, from August to November, we're going to be spending lots of time on training. Anyway, switching to Visual Studio questions. So the question number one, that I received a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn was, Alexander, is Visual Studio Code really free to use in all the circumstances? So obviously, Visual Studio Code is a very popular development IDE that's not really Visual Studio. It's just a code editor with various features. I use it myself. So the website, the SAMexpert.com website, I participate in coding that website a lot because I used to do web development when I was much younger. And I use Visual Studio Code. And think about Microsoft licensing of any sort of free licensing. And I specifically do this in quote. It's not entirely free. So when you get something for free from Microsoft, from Oracle, from any other vendor, there may be strings attached. So what I encourage you to do in general, the way of licensing thinking, is do not just trust somebody said, oh, you can just download it for free. Not necessarily. It's not necessarily that you may use that piece of software for free in your environment, in your circumstances. Obviously, when I received that question, I thought, you know what? I want to go and check if actually Visual Studio Code is free for all the organizations, for all the usage, and there are no specific strings attached. So I have it actually here on my screen, to which I'll switch very quickly. I have a page with the Visual Studio Code license. So please pay attention to a few very important bits in it. Let me cut to it. This should do. Yes, now you should be seeing my browser, Bing browser. So first, the Visual Studio Code itself. It's not, I mean, I wouldn't call it free, but just for the sake of this, for the sake of today's life, I would say it's free. It's free. There are no limitations. There are no limitations. You can even include it in your own software to demonstrate your applications. So no, you may notice there are no size limitations, no specific industry limitations. It's all good. So Visual Studio, answering that question directly, Visual Studio Code is free to use. But the problem here that you may face is the extensions. So Visual Studio Code is extendable. I use extensions myself. And those extensions may come with their own licenses. So in regards to, say, you being audited by Microsoft, Visual Studio Code will never create you any issues. If you're being audited by Microsoft, or Microsoft don't audit themselves, they assign a third-party auditor. If you go through these audits, Visual Studio Code will never be picked up by an auditor. And if an auditor, if that's, say, I wouldn't expect that from KPMG or PwC or any of the big 4, big 5 companies. But if you have a licensing review from a partner, and that partner tells you, oh, you have Visual Studio Code, you need license full Visual Studio. So that's wrong. Know that it's free. You don't need to license full Visual Studio if you just want to use Visual Studio Code functionality. But pay attention to extensions, because extensions may be problematic. Extensions may have interesting licenses. I haven't seen a single extension, so there's a possibility of that, but I haven't seen a single extension, at least on my computer, that I would be very much worried about. Then again, if they're not from Microsoft, then your compliance problems will not be with Microsoft. Hope you follow. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, whatever platform you're on right now and watching this. So to answer this question, is Visual Studio Code free to use? I'll just draw here. Big yes. But look for extensions, their licenses. And moving on, not to keep you too busy, too overwhelmed with information on this Monday morning. Visual Studio Community. So this one is more complicated. So running a bit ahead of myself. And by the way, if you like what we're doing right now, I would really appreciate if you click like there. If you click like on either on your mobile or on your computer, because that then helps YouTube then will distribute this video to more people to view, and I would really appreciate that. Visual Studio Community Edition. You probably know that it's free. Well, then it's not free. It's cost free. You don't need to pay for a license. But is it really free to use? I find that in my exercises, right now the cadence is about 2 Microsoft reviews a month-ish, sometimes more. I see it in every single infrastructure. I see it deployed in little companies, in public sector organizations, in enterprises. You will see it. Because why? Well, it's free to download. You don't need to pay for it. It's very easy to get it. It's very easy to install it. But is it necessarily free to use? Again, let's go back to my browser, where I still have Visual Studio Code open, but I do have Visual Studio Community here. It's pretty clear. We don't even need to go to the Visual Studio license, Visual Studio Community license, because even on the download page, you can see that they have outlined all the limitations. So, wait a second. Now you should see it. They have outlined all the limitations. Something hasn't gone right. Yep. Excuse me for that. If you're an individual, if that's for your home use, so fine. You can use it to create your own free or paid apps. Your own, not when you work for a company. So I am not sure, so I can't answer the question. I had a question already. Does that apply if you work for somebody as a contractor? I think it depends. I think if you interpret that as developing paid apps, maybe it's okay to use Visual Studio Community for that. If you work on your own, if you are a limited company, if you represent a limited company which you own, maybe that's okay. So I would probably say that's fine. Why? Because when you look at organizations, because then you just become an organization. If you look at the limitations in regards to organizations, so let's walk through them one by one. So just to make it clear. An unlimited number of users within an organization can use Visual Studio Community. So far, so good. And then there's a limitation for the following scenarios. In a classroom learning environment. So to learn how to code, to learn how to use Visual Studio Community, to learn how to code something else. A learning environment. So no development. So in this particular highlighted scenario, there's no software development that is allowed. For academic research, I have no idea what that means. Maybe just to write some code that contributes to some sort of academic research, I don't know, math or physics or chemistry or whatever. Or for contributing to open source projects. And Microsoft used it to be written a bit differently. So now they start from this. So these are the limitations. So you must be aware that there are these limitations. So there's no, in this particular paragraph, there are no commercial usage scenarios. And then for all the other usage scenarios, which includes commercial, yes, it is allowed them to be used for developing your software that you sell, so paid software, but only by up to 5 users. Only by up to 5 users. And then if your organization is more than 250 computers, PCs, workstations, and annual revenue, or, by the way, not and, or your annual revenue is above $1 million US. So you may even have 2 people, but your annual revenue is above $1 million, then there is no commercial usage. So that's it. So there's that. I would probably say something isn't right today. I really apologize for what's going on the screen. So that's it. Simple as that. I usually, when I find Visual Studio community, I say, you know what, if you are not using this and learning or, and I work with large organizations, more than 250 PCs. If I find it, I say, just remove it, because you would have to prove that you use it for academic or open source or any other reasons. And I've asked customers, can you prove me that you're under those 3 permitted usages? Nobody could. Not a single organization came back and said, yeah, we have proof. We use it just for that, for academic research or for, whatever the permitted use. Let me read them again. In a classroom learning environment, for academic research or for contributing to open source projects. So how it happens is, we get the inventory. Step number 1, we have an inventory. Then I look at the inventory, I find Visual Studio community. I go back to the customer and say, how do you use this? They can't even answer that question. We don't know. Somebody installed it. Admins downloaded it and installed it. And in that case, if you can't answer it, I would assume, and any auditor would assume, that it's not used under those permitted scenarios. So Visual Studio community, get rid of it. Get rid of it. You probably won't be penalized. But if you are in a scenario when Microsoft are really pissed off with you for any reason, you ruined relationship, you canceled enterprise agreement a couple of years ago, you're not buying new licenses, Microsoft send you auditors. The auditors may have an agenda to actually punish you as much as possible. I'm not saying I've ever seen this, but I can imagine that may happen, specific to countries and territories as well. And in that case, they find Visual Studio community. So only once in my life, I've seen this when a customer was asked to buy Visual Studio Enterprise licenses because they violated the terms of Visual Studio community. Normally, you would just be asked to remove it. So, although maybe it's not a huge commercial issue for you, it is not compliant. It's a non-compliance issue. And I encourage you to remove it just for these purposes. And to be honest, to get to $1 million in annual revenue, so I've just started my own company. I think we'll get to that in a couple of years. And we're not even close to 250 PCs, to be honest. So don't play with fire. Don't play with fire. And then the other one, which we also discussed, I think it was a question that came on our SQL Server Live. Maybe not, maybe later than that. I don't remember really, but that was another question. Is SQL Server Developer really free to use? What are the limitations there? What are the strings attached there? So SQL Server Developer, and going back to my browser, SQL Server Developer is a full-featured free edition, licensed for use as development and test database in a non-production environment. Development and test. Actually, there's more than that. So if you go to the actual license, which is somewhere around here, no. Anyway, if you find the license, there's a license. If you click through the links, you'll find the license. There's also demonstration and design. And demonstration rights, by the way, are even wider than with the software that you get through Visual Studio. Because even don't want to go there. Don't overcomplicate this. So SQL Server Developer has no such limitations as Visual Studio community. So whatever your size is, whatever your turnover is, whatever your purpose is, if you have databases deployed for development purposes, it makes perfect sense to deploy SQL Server Developer Edition. Yes, when you download it, you need to register a free Visual Studio account. Again, it's free. No strings attached. You just register it. They give you a key, they give you an installation media, the link to it. So Simple as that. So in theory, everybody, even your admins, everyone who accesses that machine with SQL Server Developer needs to have a similar license. In practice, nobody's going to check it. In practice, what's important is that when you have a dev test environment and you don't deploy SQL Server Standard or SQL Server Enterprise, you can get them through Visual Studio. But I'll explain again what I explain every time. Why I say use SQL Server Developer instead of SQL Server Enterprise. And SQL Server Developer is an equivalent of SQL Server Enterprise. So no strings attached, but what's the benefit? So imagine we have a machine with SQL Server database or services, reporting, integration, keep forgetting what the EA stands for, master data services, any of the paid SQL Server services. But the simple example is it's a database. And it's used for development or test. So you may test a solution with a third-party software. That's also allowed. So usually how people think is we're going to install SQL Server Enterprise for these two developers. So these are developers. I'll put D, developers. So they're dev people in DevOps. We will put SQL Server Enterprise on this machine because these two people are licensed with Visual Studio Professional, VS Pro. So far, so good. What then appears is there's a whole department of admins, backup operators, security operators, patch managers, 200 people that somehow touch this computer. They don't develop, they don't test, they don't do anything on the computer, they just manage it. They all need Visual Studio Professional license at least. When you install SQL Server Developer here, this problem disappears. As long as you don't use it in production, you're absolutely fine. So we have a few minutes left, and what I want to talk about is the definition of production. Do I have a slide, empty slide for it? Yeah, I do. So the definition of production, because that was another question that came after that question about Visual Studio and SQL Server. What's the Microsoft definition of production? Basically, so I won't go into the literal definition. I want to explain it to you. If you have an environment in which there's either production workload, so it's just purely prod. That's prod. That's simple, isn't it? Simple. But if you have a staging environment, so that's what the problem is with the definition, understanding Microsoft definition. You have a staging environment. What sometimes happens in staging environment, it's not yet production. It's not yet production, but it may be because you're staging already, you're getting it ready for being deployed. It may be connected to a production database. So prod uses the same database, staging uses the same database, and then you have a dev environment that uses a database that is entirely dev, so its own DB, DevDB. I hope you can see it because it's on top of my white shirt. I should probably move aside. So this, as long as the production data is not touched, this is fine. This is not, when you interact with production data, accesses production data. That's it. Even read-only, it says accesses production data. So when you have this connection between production database and staging environment, between those two, then this staging environment requires production licenses. Please remember that. That's the thing. That's the main thing you need to understand about staging and Microsoft's definition of production environments. What you may do, follow-up question to that usually is, What if we copy data from here to here? Well, because you copied data from here to here, so you copy, it's a copy. Copy. One-way copy. That's fine. Because you copied it, you created a new database with a copy of the production DB, but you don't have access to live production data. It's a snapshot. That's fine. What shouldn't be done is if you develop something here and then move to here, that is a big no-no. Because then for Microsoft and for all the reviews I've been in, when this was reviewed, this particular, usually Microsoft are not that keen on auditing such scenarios in non-software development companies. They're not just normal companies that have some sort of in-house software development. That's usually not a problem, not a highlight of an audit. But if it's a software developer company, then this may be a problem. And I recently dealt with a company where 95% of the environment, 95% of the entire complete company environment is development. So if they would do this, they would have to buy production licenses. So no movement of data from. You can move schemas. Obviously, you have to move schemas because you update the database. You may apply changes, but cloning is a big no-no. Moving data from dev to prod is a big no-no. That's Microsoft's definition of production. So as long as you're not touching the production data, as long as your copying of production data is one way to dev, MSDN licenses, Visual Studio licenses are still viable options. Otherwise, you have to buy production licenses. So I hope this all makes sense. Thank you for being with me this morning. And I will see you next time on Wednesday, 4th of August, 2 o'clock. There'll be the first session of the 8-part training on Microsoft License Management. There are 9,000 people already registered. Well, 9,200 people. If you want to join, by all means, I'm expecting the actual live attendance of about 1,000 people, which is still quite a huge number. Have a great, productive week. Have a great day. Thank you for being here this morning. I can see pretty high numbers for these lives, which is encouraging. And safe with knowledge of Microsoft licensing. Have a great day. Cheers. And by the way, click like, please click like. There's a like button. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.